Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Beyond GIS. I'm Kurt, your host. In today's episode, we're going to touch on technology blind spots and really focus on key decision makers and leaders inside business that aren't technology specialists or data specialists themselves, but for them, it's all about how can they leverage data and leverage technology to do their role better, empower their teams, and drive really awesome decisions which are going to move the needle within their organization. So if you think about any large corporate, any large government entity, and those leaders responsible for leading a function within the business, it's really important that they trust the data and information they're getting. For them, the quality of the decisions and the outcomes downstream, what they're there to drive, and this is sort of how their performance in their role is going to be recognized by their stakeholders and their leaders as well. So we need to acknowledge that they're really busy. They may have dozens and or hundreds of people under them within their teams leading the charge and doing the real work. They themselves either don't have the time or don't have the expertise, the experience to validate the information, the analysis, the interpretive outputs being put in front of them. They need to lean on and trust their teams. So beyond the sort of interpersonal trust that needs to be exuded into the data sets they're actually receiving and the analysis, the reports, the dashboards, the mapping outputs that are coming from their team, they need to understand them without the jargon, and they need to have clarity on the assumptions and sort of the lineage, the inputs going into the results, the analysis, the reports, the dashboards, which are going to allow them to make robust, authoritative decisions and or present the information to their decision makers in a way that they are clear about, again, those assumptions. It's those unknown assumptions that catch people out so often, and that's where trust is lost. So as part of the sort of process, there's sort of 4 technology blind spots that we're going to focus on today and discuss. There's governance, data governance. There's ensuring the right processes, the business workflows are being followed. There's regular and sort of reliable reporting, consistent reporting mechanisms that are coming out of the business that drive the trust, that increase the trust to ensure these decisions are made robustly. And of course, there's privacy and security concerns. I've spent quite a bit of time working in the sort of social sector. My first job in the health sector here in New Zealand. And privacy, security around data, confidential information is clearly of utmost importance. So understanding that these leaders, they want to be empowered by technology, they want to use data-driven decisions inside their business. So understanding this and knowing that's a trajectory your business has to move towards and the journey they need to go on, digital transformation. Governance is of utmost importance. It's impossible for all the leaders in any business to understand the nuance of what's happening under the hood, so to speak, and how people come to the conclusions they come to through their work. So strong governance processes across the board are really important. So at a simplistic level in the data world, maintenance of metadata and, data about data, obviously, but actually that permeates through the whole sort of data analysis pipeline, so to speak. So it's not just about understanding the metadata of input data sources, it's understanding the associated metadata around the analysis and the ETL processes, the transformation processes of data that are going on, which obviously all drive the white box, the transparency of what's been done to the data, what processes, what statistical methods, what geospatial analysis, what AI analysis has occurred, with a key point noting down the assumptions. There's always assumptions, there's always bias in data, and we can't understand our business leaders to know that inherently. We as technology and data professionals need to provide this through to them in an easy, jargon-free way, which will again drive the trust they have of the outputs we're giving them, and also, the authority they then have of making decisions downstream around the data. So think about your data governance processes. A flexible framework around this is really important. We don't want to restrict the tools, the data, the software that the teams have to actually do their job, but we need to come up with flexible frameworks instead of these rigid sort of processes to ensure they're enabled to get the most out of their data. But, it also can't be the Wild West. We need to drive that maturity of data, of metadata, of governance through the business, because end of the day, the old proverb stands, rubbish in, rubbish out. And we could have, in this case, the best analysis, the best scientists, the best statistical modeling going on, but there's only so much you can do to clean up data that otherwise is not fit for purpose. And so if it's the only data that's available, if another identified data set in this case couldn't be used to drive a better outcome at the end, that needs to be transparently communicated as a key risk of that interpretive analysis that's come out the back end, again, for the robust decision-making processes and driving trust in the leaders across an organization. So beyond sort of governance processes, another key risk is just ensuring the right processes are being followed. Now, right has to be determined by leaders within a business and sort of SME experts in a business about what's fit for purpose and right for that business. So once those established sort of frameworks, standards have been agreed upon, and often we see this in sort of metadata standard sort of frameworks, data strategies, IT strategies across a business, the next stage is actually executing upon it. A strategy sitting in a PDF document on a drive that nobody reads might feel good at the time of delivery, but where the real action happens is obviously the delivery, the execution against that strategy. And so there are elements there about starting to break down silos, about how do we enable cross-functional teams to operate better together. How do we use and leverage modern cloud technologies to ensure we enable this across the business? And then most importantly, once you've sort of put the framework and the ingredients in the mix with the right processes and strategies that relate to that line of business, it's about follow-up, it's about cultural change, it's about moving the needle so that people clearly understand why we're doing this, the importance of it, what it means downstream, which will drive buy-in to the processes change that's needed, and then hopefully we get a lovely positive feedback loop going on where better decisions are coming out the end of the sort of data chain analysis workflows, which drives more trust to the leaders, which asks the leaders, which enforces or means the leaders are more empowered to ask better questions, which will drive better work and analysis back into the data analysis teams, for instance. And so we get this flow going about better decisions, better questions being asked of the data, more interesting work for the data folks, leading to more interesting outputs, which lead to better decisions. And we just get this flow going inside the business. And really, if you think about the sort of flywheel effect of sort of Jim Collins' books around building great businesses, the same could be said about building great sort of workflows and decision-making processes that are data-driven inside a business. So often leaders inside business, particularly those that are leading a function of the business or an SME, it could be the head of environmental outcomes, it could be the head of network infrastructure, it could be the head of school location planning and health location planning. They are busy, they have large teams. One thing that will drive trust to them and a greater understanding of what's happening within the business is just reliable, consistent sort of reporting mechanisms. So if we think about the amount of work that happens inside business and the amount of silos and how difficult it is to get people marching on a journey together, a great way to start to drive that trust and understanding and that sort of seamless integration between different roles within a business is just strong, consistent reporting. And a lot of this can be data-driven now. This can be automated. So, imagine a world where an executive is getting from their data team, a map-based visual report every week about the outcomes that have happened in the team, what's happened, what they've achieved that week, where the assumptions or bottlenecks might be, but presented in such a way that is not too technical. They're interested in the impact on the outcomes and the timeframes and the milestones and the assumptions that have gone into certain work, which they need to take account of in decision-making processes. They will never understand the issues around visual interpretation of satellite imagery, and that the CNN, the convolutional neural net's just not behaving nicely. We need to frame this in such a way that they understand the implications in their role and what they're trying to lead, but don't sort of tsunami wave them with complex technical jargon and speak. Again, this will drive trust. As technologists, a big part of what we need to do is take responsibility for how we talk about data, how we talk about technology, and just appreciate that it's on us really to do the translation into business speak, for instance, or executive speak, because they're in that role having very different outcomes they're trying to lead and responsibilities than we are in the role of trying to make sense of vast amounts of data, for instance. So again, take it upon ourselves to be the translators into business. And once that happens, the flywheel effect starts moving, and they're informed and they're more knowledgeable and they ask better decisions. And very quickly you're starting to drive and move the needle about the value of data and geospatial inside that business function, which will drive more investment into the work you do and the work your team does. But importantly, it'll move the needle on the strategic initiatives inside the business in a very quick way, in a robust and objective way, to drive the strong decision-making processes that leaders are looking to do. So the final sort of technology blind spot we're going to touch on for the non-technical leader within the business is privacy and security concerns. In the day and age now of work from home and work being dispersed everywhere, and remote laptops and cloud accounts everywhere for driving everything, and the cloud in general, and then obviously cybersecurity impacts that are happening globally, and attacks and everything else. This is of utmost concern for very obvious reasons. There's a few things to think through here, but we need to understand the data and the confidentiality of the data itself, what it represents and who it's representing. So if we think about social services, and let's talk about health, it's really important, obviously, at a private level, that individuals' health information isn't exposed in a way that it shouldn't be, and obviously without their consent. So the rigor and the processes and the security and privacy mechanisms that have to happen at that level should be fit for purpose for what's trying to be achieved at that level. Now, we have to be really careful though, we don't apply that sort of really robust security privacy frameworks and the overhead associated with it to sort of everything as a blanket standard. So we need to understand, what is this data? Is it confidential? What's the impacts if it was released or got out to folks that shouldn't see it? And what's the outcomes downstream? And we need to line that up against, well, what's the impacts of people not actually having access to that data, being able to drive more informed decision-making processes inside of the business because we've locked it down so much, versus actually if it got out, is it of a concern? We need to quantify and understand this and measure them against each other. So, if we take the example of the earthquakes in Christchurch in 2010, 2011, the various agencies around town, they were really good. They all opened up their data sets, subsurface data sets, electrical assets under the ground, fiber assets under the ground, water assets under the ground, because it was an emergency, it was a disaster response, and there was stuff happening everywhere. There's burst pipes, there's electricity out, there's fiber being disconnected through obviously the earthquake impacts. And they acknowledged very quickly, with the amount of activity going on, we had to open and make all this data that we have accessible to those that are trying to rebuild the roads or turn buildings on and off in terms of power, electricity, water. It was really successful. Now, prior to that, many agencies didn't share data, and a big part of that would be the liability issues around it. If we say that the subsurface assets are here, but actually they're not, that has a really big health and safety impact to it, right? In terms of potential risk of, let's say, someone putting a digger bucket through a 11 kilovolt cable, electricity cable. That's all very valid. But the opposite to keeping it closed is obviously, how do you get the validation and knowledge of that data as representative of the real world? You know, the location is where our data says it is. And so by opening it up very quickly, if you have the right disclaimers and knowledge and education around the data and the certainty of the quality of the data, and that's represented well to those end users of the data, you can create a really interesting data feedback loop that will inherently improve your data assets, because someone working on electrical assets underground sees in his mapping application or his printout that actually those water pipes are not where the map says they are. And so a mechanism can be put in place that can be sent back to the authority that owns and controls those water pipes about, hey, this is wrong, here's some information we captured, we're just letting you know that that piece of spatial information is inaccurate. And so that feedback loop allows more sets of eyes to be across the data to identify what's wrong with the data, which then allows a feedback loop to improve the data, which then makes everyone's world better. Now, the alternative approach, which is still common, is because we can't be sure of the quality of the data, we're not going to release it because of the liability concerns, for instance. But you're never going to improve the data. It's so incrementally small, the improvement of that data, because you just don't have the eyeballs across it. So look, it's just something to consider. It's something to think about what's fit for purpose when we're talking about privacy and security. It's understanding what happens if this data gets out. It's actually understanding, should this data be open to begin with, particularly as government entities and sort of taxpayer-funded entities. It should be accessible by the citizens and other agencies. And that's lining that up against, if we do lock it down, what's the disbenefit? Who's going to miss out? Who's not going to have access to the data that otherwise could add that data to some other data, 1 + 1 = 10, and drive a new initiative, a new outcome for a city, for a community, for instance. So have the discussion. Really think through the outcomes, both bad and good outcomes that come from releasing data, making it accessible, and the disbenefits and or benefits of either. This will put a bit more of a robust framework around it. It will help you enable folks out at the moment, maybe in the dark because they don't have access to data, and it will drive that sort of open data collaborative ecosystem, particularly interagency, hopefully much faster. So we touched on 4 key sort of technology blind spots that non-technical business leaders are faced with often daily. There's governance and the associated processes around it. There's ensuring the right processes are being followed by the right people at the right time within business. There's reliable and consistent reporting that they see on a regular basis. It drives trust, it enhances knowledge, it lets them know, robust updates about what's happening and the action that's happening within the business, moving the business forward in the right direction. And then we talk quite a bit about privacy and security, and really having fit for purpose privacy and security regimes in place, acknowledging the benefits and disbenefits of data being released or not released to individuals. So to sort of sum all that up, cloud is really important in the enablement processes around all of this. Single source of truth, this decision maker doesn't want to get 5 different Excel spreadsheets from 5 different teams telling him the answer 5 different ways to a question he has in business, right? So the single source of truth associated with the governance and metadata processes around it is really important. And really what all this means is the risk associated with certain decision making through the transparency of the processes of the data, of the assumptions around the data and the associated interpretive sort of results that come out of it are just really clear and in jargon-free language, so that they can make robust decisions with the sort of risk frameworks they have because of the transparency of how that's been presented through to them. It's going to drive that flywheel inside a business of everyone starting to level up around how we as technical people convert our world into language that the decision makers understand. Once we get the understanding and knowledge portrayed to them well, they'll ask better questions and we'll do better work. And we'll all move the needle together quickly and much faster. That's that digital transformation flywheel we want to all get on. So, I'll leave it at that, but just think breaking down silos, cross-functional team collaboration, standards and transparency, and from a data release, privacy, security perspective, really think through, are we throttling the business with our robust processes? Are they fit for purpose? And are the frameworks we've got in place enabling or disabling our folks to do the work they need to do?